Welcome, everyone, to Novel Ideas. My name is James Floyd Kelly. This is Season 2, Episode 4. So I'm here with my friend Eric Wex. Hey, Eric, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. We're having some lovely weather here today in Atlanta, probably about 60 degrees. It's awesome.
That's been our winter. Like, we just have not had winter. We've been in the mid-50s to about 60, so...
We've had some lows in the 20s and 30s, but if it would stay like this year round, oh man, I would love it, but not going to happen. So
yeah, no joke.
yeah. Hey, viewers, thank you for tuning in. Again, this is Novel Ideas. This is Eric's and my 4th podcast now that we're on Geek Dad. The podcast has moved over, and we're also on iTunes, right, Eric?
Yeah, you can subscribe to us on iTunes. So if you wandered into this on YouTube or you found it through the Geek Dad site, if you want to see it on a weekly basis and make sure that you stay up to date with it, grab us on iTunes.
Yep. Well, viewers, today we have an interesting conversation. I hope you like this one, and it's sort of it's sort of funny that it's hit Eric and I not at the same time, but we both were very excited to sort of talk about this topic. We're going to talk today about two things: procrastination and writer's block.
Yeah.
I can't speak for Eric, but I can tell you that I have experienced writer's block, and I have experienced procrastination, and I do know the difference. I do know the difference. I know when I'm procrastinating versus when I am truly having a hard time getting the words out. What about you?
Yeah, I think they may have similar roots, right? In the way the mind actually functions, and one of the cool things that I think I could bring to the table today is I think when we're dealing with this stuff, there's a lot of tricks of the trade out there on how to get over it, and those are important. I want to talk about it from a little bit more of the scientific point of view of why does your mind actually get hung up in the first place, which can be, I think, useful to know, and then give you strategies that have some pretty good scientific evidence behind them for being able to help. So
that sounds like we before the show we were talking, and I had told Eric, I had told you that when I experience writer's block, it's almost always when I'm finishing up a book, usually the very last chapter. It's almost like my subconscious just refuses to allow me to finish a book. I have scrapped last chapters and started over, only later to realize that there's something going on up here that doesn't want to let me finish a book, close it down, and it truly does. In that case, it's writer's block. My creativity just goes to zero. It's not procrastination. I want to finish it. Something is going on in my head, and I guess I hope there's a scientific explanation for it.
For me, it's the mid game. So when I can see the light at the end of the tunnel on a 100,000-word novel, I usually sprint pretty quickly because as I often say on this podcast, I think second acts in fiction are really hard to write. So first act is the introduction. You know how you want to introduce the topic. You know where you want it to go, and you know how you want it to end. Those are usually what a writer knows. But actually getting the middle part where you're taking the character on the journey can be very difficult. So sometimes in there I get a pretty bad case of writer's block of how do I walk this out and get steps to the end. So that's where it strikes me. And also I think there's this despair of I'm not done yet, right? Like I want the product finished and out there. I want the story out of my head. And sometimes you can get stuck in this place where you're like frustrated with yourself that it's not coming out on the paper faster. And that can then make the situation much worse. That frustration with yourself can make the situation much, much worse.
Well, I don't know about all nonfiction writers, but I do know quite a few nonfiction writers. I know some psychology writers. I know some history writers, and of course technology writers. And with technology books, the greatest, the one I hear the most from new technology writers is they get bogged down in the middle as well, because frequently they know their subject and they go in full force. Chapter 1's done, chapter 2's done. By about chapter 4 or 5, they start to lose steam and they start to question whether or not they've ordered their chapters correctly, or whether they've explained it well enough in the beginning so that the reader has a solid foundation for the middle part of the book. That's never been a problem for me. Mine has always been, I run full force all the way to the end, but when I hit the end, it's like, oh, I can't get it done. And so,
So
if there's a scientific explanation, I'd love to hear it.
let's get into what the mind is doing. I was just going to say that. Let's get into what the mind is actually doing there. So when you think about the difference between a rabbit and a human, right? What's the difference in the way we actually function? It's actually pretty scientifically proven. It's about the way we handle the world symbolically. So that's the actual difference in cognitive ability between us and the rest of the animal kingdom. So a great example of what I'm talking about is that when let's say I had a dog and I was an animal abuser. All right, I'll play the animal abuser today, so you can be mad at me. If I kick the dog, right, the dog is going to be nervous around me in the future. When I walk in the room, the dog's going to get nervous. It might get nervous when it hears my voice. It might get nervous when it smells me. It is not, however, going to get nervous when it is chewing on a bone, because it doesn't associate that bone with me. Now, the human being is totally different because we have this ability to make broader and more extensive associations. I mean, it's what's created our technology, is all these associations that animals aren't able to make, right? So for the human being, the mind can be, I mean, this is a classic example. Hey, I'm doing really well at writing today. Man, it's 10 o'clock, and I've already got 1,000 words on the page. This is a fantastic day. I'm going to just crank. And as soon as you think that thought, by checking your progress, you are inviting the limbic system to your rabbit brain to give you a fear response. And you're not in control of whether you're checking. You're just noticing that you're getting 1,000 words done early today. That's okay to just notice that. But then the problem becomes you mind check yourself, and your brain spews a whole bunch of fear-based chemicals, not based on the fact that there's any evidence in front of you that you're going to have a problem, but just based on the fact that your mind is checking on the problem.
You're talking about assuming that the next day you didn't hit 1,000 words by 10 o'clock.
Or that you know that other writers don't. Or right. That you've heard that 2,000 words a day is what a writer should do.
Should be doing, right.
Right, like all that cultural stuff surrounding how many words a day do I get done comes into play, and very easily, whether you want it or not, your mind throws you chemicals. Then the human being gets into a bigger problem, because what they're facing doesn't exist in the real world, does it? Right? Like, the dog only faces problems that exist. That person kicked me. I stay away from that person. It deals with the world from external stimuli. But now the human being has had an internal stimuli that is giving it the same fear response that the dog has to being kicked. But it's all between here. And that's where you get that's how you get real cases of writer's block, because the instant thing to do if I've got a problem in the real world, that person kicks me, I fix it. I stay away, I avoid, I growl really loudly if I'm the dog, I bite them to make sure they stay, I fix the problem. The problem is, as soon as the human mind starts trying to fix the writer's block, it gets worse. Because the instant it becomes a real Chinese finger trap, right? Like, you pull against the writer's block, and you are less able to think creatively, and then you pull harder, and you're less able to think creatively. So whatever strategies we use to get around the writer's block have to deal with this fact of the way the mind works, right? That if I'm continually checking, am I having writer's block, I will get writer's block. So I want to apologize to the viewer today on this podcast, who we are giving writer's block to at this moment in time.
We're making them think about it.
Right? Like, that will happen to one of us today, right? So I'll apologize up front. But
my wife is funny. Frequently when I'm in a book project, and sometimes I'm writing 2 books at once. My maximum is I have been writing 3 books at once. The technology thing is, I don't recommend it. It's just, when you write nonfiction, you take the contracts when you can get them.
Right.
And so I try never to write 3 books at once. That's happened twice in my life. But frequently I'm writing 2 books at once. And what is funny is my wife will call me on the cell phone and she'll say, "You're at the movie theater, aren't you?" And I'm like, "Yeah," because she checks the bank account at certain points in the day. And she knows that my solution to writer's block is when I just cannot get the words out, I will literally take a day or two off of work and I'll go watch a movie. Or I'll go to the bookstore and just sit for a few hours reading books. But the theater is my thing because for 2 hours or however long the movie is, I am not thinking about writing. I am totally immersed in whatever movie I've picked. But my wife gets so upset because she can't do that in her job. She'll call me and she'll say, "You're at the movie theater, aren't you?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And she's like, "Writer's block?" I'm like, "Yeah." She does. I do think she knows that I have writer's block at times. I think she secretly thinks that I sometimes get it more than I should.
She should just tell her partners, "Hey, I'll get this brief in tomorrow.
Right.
I've got lawyer's
Writer's
block."
block. I've got lawyer's block. I'd say it's a horrible experience, Eric. It really is. And anybody who's ever, been under a deadline and just sit down in front of your computer or your typewriter and you just put the fingers on the keyboards and the words just won't come. It's a horrible experience. It's a horrible feeling. But I know that it goes away. I've done this so many times now. It goes away. So I trust in my brain or whatever is going on that a day, maybe 3 days max. I think I've gone up to 3 days before I was able to put my fingers on a keyboard again. But sometime between 1 and 3 days, I know it's going to go away.
So let's talk about what's actually happening there, right? So if you think of writer's block as a Chinese finger trap, right? We can all remember Data on that horrible Next Generation episode with the finger trap, right? Okay. So if you remember that, what's the solution to Chinese finger trap, right? It is to push into it. It push into it. It's not actually to pull against it. And the answer to writer's block is the exact same thing. It's to push inward, embracing what your brain is telling you without pulling against it. I talk about this with my kids all the time, right? If you really think about what's going on when you pull against your brain, it's an insane thing to do, right? Because your mind is giving you a chemical response. So it's shot chemicals at you and said you should be having a fear response right now to this cursor on the blank page, right? It is not going to be constructive if the system that is your body shoots another batch of chemicals to combat the first.
Right.
We wonder why we get tired when we're in those mental battles. Really think about the brain sugars you must be using, right? Because now you have twice the amount of brain sugar you're using up, and none of it is directed to actually creatively solving the problem. So when you get into this writer's block, if you fight it, if you don't accept writer's block as the reality of your life, if you don't accept it as temporary, as possible, and if you don't embrace those thoughts as a piece of who you are, one piece, not the whole thing, right, but as a piece of who you are, you're just going to make it worse because you're going to fight yourself, and then your brain's at war, and that's when you get into the months-long writer's block that some people face, right? That's when you get into. That's when you get into. I guess I'm not a writer. Right. That's when the new writer gets 3 chapters into a novel, shuts it, and never picks it up again, and the world misses out on probably, maybe one of the best writers ever. That's a sad, sad place to be, but it comes by not accepting the possibilities that and the reality that all of us as writers, all of us as creative people, feel blocked in our creativity at times. So I want to argue science, and this is okay. So this is. So far, this is like, okay, is this science-based? Yes. Okay. The science behind this is really, really clear. Suppression of thoughts actually increases the thoughts you're trying to suppress. Suppression of emotions actually increases the emotions you're trying to suppress. So one of the problems we have is this research is relatively new. So the research into cognitive behavioral therapies that I'm talking about here is part of third wave cognitive behavioral therapy, and that stuff is really from about the mid-90s to the mid-2000s is really when the research that the bulk of the research is done that actually backs this stuff up.
Is this
So
coming from that book you were telling me about?
yeah, this is actually coming from a book that I'm looking at right now. It's a workbook. It's called "Get Out of Your Mind and Into Your Life." It's by a psychologist named Stephen Hayes, who I really really respect. I respect him because when you get into psychology, there's a ton of crap out there. There's a lot of try this, but not always a lot of science behind it. And Hayes is a committed scientist, and really has the stuff behind it. Here's my favorite experiment that he talks about. They took a group of kids at Harvard and they said, hey, here's an X in tape on the floor, and here's a plumb line. All we want you to do is hold the plumb line still. And in particular, we'd like you to work to make sure that the plumb line doesn't go backwards and forwards. I mean, if it moves a little bit, just make sure it's not backwards and forwards. As soon as they did that, what's going to go on the kid's brain? You can't help it but mind check whether or not the thing's moving backwards and forwards. And as soon as you mind check, the neural pathways to your muscles open up to check what your muscles are doing. And guess what? The dang plumb line starts moving backwards and forwards just as you didn't want it to do. So it's experiments, and there are lots of them that show this same kind of effect. The more that you don't want something, the more that you're not willing to accept something, the higher the stakes, the more likely inside the mind you are to get it. So one way to sum this up, Hayes says, you get what you don't want in your mind. So if you get freaked out, am I going to have writer's block? And you're like, no, I can't have writer's block. I've got a deadline. You are now 1,000% more likely to get right. Okay, so 1,000% may not be a scientific number, but you're way more likely to get writer's block than you were a second before.
Now, we're running out of time, but I will tell you this, Eric. There are times, and it's not so much a writer's block thing, and this might be something for a further discussion later on, but I will tell you that there have been times where I've cranked out 3 or 4 chapters in a row, like one right after the other in a 4-day period. There are times when my creativity tank is empty.
Yes.
And it feels like writer's block. It's not. It's just, man, I have pulled stuff out of my head so fast, so much. There's nothing left, and you need a recharge period. And
and I think that goes right back to this accepting, right? That if we accept that this is part of the process and we're willing to embrace this as part of the process, we're going to make this much easier. So, for instance, is 10 weeks of Gravlander was wonderful for me. I really enjoyed doing that this fall. I went through the despair in the middle, right? But I got it done, and I'm very grateful that I did it. And I would be willing to do it again, which means my mind's forgetting the trauma of the middle.
Right.
But I would love to do it again at some point in time in the future because I just thought it was really good for my writing. But now I haven't written fiction since.
Yeah.
That's Christmas, right? I haven't written fiction since Christmas, and that's okay, right? Like, yesterday I just outlined a story, and I got a story that's perking, that is a time travel story that I'm not sure how to make this work. But part of this time frame of letting the ground be fallow, right, is really really useful. I think here I'll give a nature metaphor, but I think that since we're kind of designed on the cycles of nature, this might be important for us. Winter matters, right? Winter is an important season, and I think it's ironic and sad that we as Americans take our holiday season, and right when all of nature is telling you to sleep, drink a cup of cocoa, sit by the hot fire, and play with games with your kids, we add this really frenetic, stupid, buying, family, shove party after party down our throat season. It's really weird. That's summer, right? That's summer activity. Winter needs to be, and I think every writer needs their winters, right? You need to let the ground go fallow to let the brain figure it out.
Well, I tell you what, let's do a takeaway. For me, I would tell any viewers watching that if you're experiencing what you call writer's block, or if you think you have it, just hang in there because it does go away. I mean, for me personally, I can say, even if it's a creativity tank is empty, or if it's a true writer block experience, my experience has been anywhere from 1 day to maybe a week, 3 days typical, and I'm ready to go again.
And I would say my takeaway is step towards it. Like, accept fully the things that you're feeling, including all the fears. Allow them to have a piece of your mind, but not all of it.
Go see a movie. Try that.
Yeah. And if you get really stuck, honestly, Get Out of Your Mind and Into Your Life by Stephen Hayes is an excellent place to figure out why you as a writer can't move forward. So,
We'll put that.
it's, you know, unlike some other books that are self-help books for writers, one of the things I really like this is it's very general, and it's not telling you the proper it's going to give you strategies and skills that are scientifically based for the mind, but it isn't going to tell you things like you must do morning pages every day if you're ever going to be successful. There are other writers out there who do that to artists, and I just don't find that to be constructive.
Let's remember to put a link to that book on the video's web write up. So, listen, we are definitely
on YouTube.
We're out of time. I am actually starting to write again, which is really good. I had a period there where I wasn't really feeling it, but I'm back on track. And congratulations! I hope your little fiction idea starts to take root.
I like this story.
That's always good when you like it.
I'm going to make a short story out of it. I'm hoping to make a short story out of it. I wanted to have it done before Valentine's Day, but it's not going to happen. But this is a good story.
Very cool. Hey, listen, my friend, we will pick this back up next Tuesday, right?
Sounds good. Hey, if you want to get a copy of that story, you should sign up for my mailing list, because I know for sure that I will be putting that out on my mailing list. And in fact, if you catch this video later and I've already put that story out, just email me after you sign up for my mailing list, ericwecks, ERIKWECKS, @gmail.com. Email me and ask for a copy of it, and I will get it to you.
Sounds good. Viewers, my name is James Floyd Kelly again. This is my friend Eric Wex, and this is Novel Ideas, Season 2, Episode 4. We will see you all again next week. Eric, have a good week.
You too. Have fun.
Yeah.